Welcome to lesson 1. Here we'll go through how to create a Spring Startup web application. To get our application up and running, we have written code in two Java files. The first file is webappconfig.java. We have a completely annotation driven setup and hence don't require web.xml. This file is loaded using initializer.java. Initializer.java implements web application initializer, and we need to use annotation config web application context to load our configuration and the beans. The dispatcher servlet is registered using servlet registration.dynamic. The configuration to get our application up and running, including the data source configuration, transaction management, view resolution, the entity manager factory, and the interceptor, are configured as beans in the webconfig.java. We use JPA and Hibernate to get to our database. We have a URL based view resolver to get to the home page, and the interceptor is used to intercept any request to the data URL. We'll have a look at the code of our interceptor, and also we require resource handler to serve the static resources. Application.properties file maintains the configuration for our database connection strings, the password, etc. Let's have a look at the code now. To create a simple Spring Startup web project, click on New, Spring Starter Project, put your project name here, click on Next, either scroll down, click on Web, select Web and Finish. So here we have our project and we have our initializer.java and webconfig.java. So let's have a look at webappconfig.java. So we have a add configuration annotation to let Spring know that this is a configuration file, and you can find beans here. Then we have a enable web MVC. This is basically to get our MVC part up and running. We have enabled transaction management for Spring's transaction driven management capability. Then we have a component scan to get our beans. We have a property source to get our properties, which we will be defining in application.properties. Our repositories are present in com.spring.repository. Our web app config extends webmvc configure adapter. We have used at resource to get our properties file loaded. Let me show you the properties file now. In source main resources, we keep our application properties. So we have our database URL, the username, the password. We need to have a look at the SQL. So this property is true, and create drop is what you do the first time to create the schema. And as we are using MySQL here, we have a MySQL 5 dialect loaded. In web app config, we load our properties, create our data source bean by loading the username, password, URL and the driver. We require the entity manager factory through which we will get our sessions. Here we provided the data source. The create drop will use our models to create the table, and we need to set the package to be scanned to get our models. Our adapter is Hibernate for the JPA. We provide it here and set it here, and then we set the properties which we have loaded for the adapter. For transactions, we use JPA Transaction Manager. Our View Resolver is required to get us to our home page, which is the first page loaded, the home JSP, and we use our URL based resolver to get to our home page. We need to guard the resource which has URL / data in it. Hence, we require an interceptor. We exclude the home page and the login page, as access to this is required by the user even if he is not logged in. And at last, we need to add our static resources like the CSS file, so they are not handled by the View Resolver. So this is all the configuration we have in our web app config.java. Let's see how we load it now. So here we have our initializer.java, which actually implements web application initializer. And on the startup method, we load our annotation config web application context and give it our web app config.class. Our dispatcher servlet needs to be loaded on startup, and the mapping to our home page has to be provided, and hence we give it a set load on startup as 1. Once the application is loaded, hence we get to our home page. Our home page is governed by AngularJS, and we are using a UI view here. So once the application is loaded and we get a request for the root or the home page, we return a home, which gets us to our home.jsp. So that's our application's initial configuration.